The year is 1552. A tiny Hungarian fortress holds just 2,000 souls, bakers, mothers, shopkeepers, farmers, outside their walls. 40,000 of the most feared warriors the world has ever seen. The Ottoman Empire's unstoppable army. The math is brutal. One defender for every 20 attackers. What unfolded over the next 38 days would defy every rule of warfare and prove that when people fight for everything they love, numbers become meaningless. This isn't a story about professional armies. This is about a merchant's wife who transformed kitchens into arsenals, a farmer who'd never held a weapon becoming a warrior, children who became the thin line between survival and annihilation. You're about to discover how ordinary humans stopped the most powerful military machine on 3 continents, how household tools became weapons of war, how desperation became a force multiplier that no empire could calculate. Because when the Ottomans marched on Eger Castle, they brought cannons, elite troops, and absolute confidence. What they didn't bring: an answer to people who had nowhere left to run and everything left to lose. To grasp how shopkeepers accomplished what trained armies couldn't, we need to step into their world on that fateful September morning. Hungary in 1552 was a nation being torn apart. Like a rope in a deadly tug-of-war, the kingdom stretched between 2 empires, the Austrian Habsburgs pulling from the west, the Ottoman juggernaut pushing from the east. Something had to snap. Captain Istvan Dobo stood atop Eger Castle's walls, scanning the horizon. At just 32 years old, war had already aged him beyond his years. But the intelligence reaching him now was different, darker. His wife approached quietly. "The reports, are they true?" Dobo's jaw tightened. "They're no longer rumors, the army is coming." The Ottoman Empire in 1552 represented the pinnacle of military dominance. Under Suleiman the Magnificent, their territory stretched from the deserts of Baghdad to the gates of Budapest, from Egyptian pyramids to Crimean shores. Their war machine had perfected the art of siege warfare through decades of conquest. Their track record: 50 years without losing a single major siege, not one. The Ottomans had a chilling saying: "Where the Sultan's cannons speak, walls fall silent." History had proven them right. Their massive artillery pieces could reduce ancient stone fortifications to rubble. Their Janissary Corps, Christian children taken young and forged into Muslim super soldiers, were the special operations forces of their era. Their logistics could feed and supply armies of 100,000 for months. Eger Castle stood like a solitary sentinel on the road to Upper Hungary, and beyond that, Vienna itself. If Eger collapsed, the path to Austria's heart lay wide open. The fortress was modest at best, aging walls built for a different era of combat, a tiny garrison of just 300 trained soldiers. The other 1,700 defenders, refugees fleeing the Ottoman wave, farmers watching their lands burn behind them, merchants whose trade routes had vanished, women and children with nowhere else to go. Among these unlikely warriors were 2 individuals who would prove instrumental. Eva Sessi, a merchant's wife who organized the women into disciplined work units, managing everything from supplies to battlefield medicine. Georgi Bornemissa, a minor nobleman with an engineering mind and a dangerous obsession with explosives. "God gave us fire," he'd say with a wild grin. "I'm simply perfecting his design." As September arrived, Dobo assembled his improbable army. Battle-hardened soldiers stood beside farmers still learning which end of a spear to hold. Housewives practiced the mechanics of loading crossbows. Children as young as 8 received assignments in ammunition supply chains. The captain's orders couldn't have been simpler or more absolute. "We hold this ground, or Hungary holds nothing." The Ottoman force approaching Eger that September was a masterwork of military engineering and organization. At the army's core marched 15,000 Janissaries, the legendary warrior slaves who had never tasted defeat in siege warfare. These weren't ordinary conscripts. Taken as boys through the Devshirme system, they were raised from childhood for a single purpose: flawless combat execution. They took no wives. They owned no property. Their entire existence centered on fighting and winning for the Sultan. Behind these elite troops rumbled 16 colossal siege cannons, each weighing 3 tons. The largest could launch 150-pound stone projectiles capable of punching through 6 feet of solid masonry. Moving the artillery train alone required 500 oxen. Ottoman engineers had developed a precise science of siege warfare. They'd calculated exactly how many impacts were needed to create a breach: 300 cannonballs per wall section. Mathematics made cold and deadly. The supply column stretched for miles. 2,000 camels loaded with enough powder, ammunition, and provisions to sustain operations through winter if necessary. The Ottomans had learned through centuries of conquest that logistics win wars as surely as courage. Commanding this massive force were Ahmed Pasha and Ali Pasha, 2 generals who despised each other personally but shared absolute professional confidence. They'd captured dozens of fortresses together. Eger, with its crumbling walls and civilian defenders, would be routine, another line on their resume of conquest. Inside Eger, Dobo confronted harsh reality: 300 professional soldiers, mostly light cavalry and infantry who'd survived previous Ottoman encounters. They understood what was coming. The other 1,700 defenders had been training for mere weeks. The women, under Ava Sessi's leadership, organized into specialized combat units. Some would manage the boiling oil and water stations, kitchen warfare scaled to military dimensions. Others would serve as medics and ammunition runners. "Your kitchens are now armies," Sessi told them during drills. The women practiced in shifts, learning to pour scalding liquids from battlements without burning themselves, timing movements between volleys of enemy arrows. Georgi Bornemissa worked feverishly in the castle's improvised workshop, experimenting with something unprecedented: wheels packed with gunpowder and metal shrapnel that could be rolled into attacking formations. The design was elegantly simple, but completely untested. "If this works," he told his assistants, "we turn their numbers into their weakness. If it doesn't," he never finished that sentence. The castle's defenses were humble. Walls constructed in the 14th century, designed for earlier warfare. Against modern Ottoman cannons, stone would be merely an inconvenience, not a barrier. The garrison possessed 40 small cannons, toys compared to Ottoman siege artillery. Their gunpowder reserves would sustain perhaps 2 weeks of intense combat. But Eger held hidden advantages. The castle perched on a rocky hill, making underground mining operations difficult. Its water supply came from an internal well, impossible to poison or cut off, and the approach routes were narrow, preventing the Ottomans from deploying their full numerical superiority simultaneously. On September 9th, Ottoman scouts appeared on the horizon. By September 11th, the entire army had arrived. The defenders watched from the walls as 40,000 men established camp, their tents spreading across the valley like a canvas city. The sounds of preparation, wheels creaking, officers shouting, hammers ringing against metal, carried clearly to the fortress. That night, Ottoman heralds approached under a white flag. Their message was elegant in its simplicity: "Surrender now and you may leave alive. Resist and watch your families perish." Dobo's response was equally direct: "Come and take us." Dawn broke not with sunlight but with thunder, the thunder of cannons. The first barrage announced the Ottoman presence with devastating authority. 16 siege guns fired in sequence, their massive frames lurching backward with each discharge. The stones of Eger trembled in response. On the walls, civilians experiencing bombardment for the first time learned the true meaning of terror. Each impact sent stone fragments flying like deadly hail. Dust clouds rose like phantoms, coating everything in gray powder. By noon, 50 projectiles had struck the eastern wall. The mathematical certainty of destruction had begun its work. But Dobo had prepared his people for this psychological assault. "Stone breaks," he told them, "we bend." The defenders adapted with surprising speed. Women and children formed bucket brigades, not for water but for earth and timber to reinforce damaged sections. When cannons fired, spotters shouted warnings. Defenders learned to read the rhythm: load, aim, fire, impact. In those precious seconds between shots, they moved. Days 4 through 7 brought the first probing attacks. Ottoman irregulars, expendable troops used to test defenses, approached with scaling ladders. Here, the civilians received their first taste of combat. A farmer named Joseph, who'd practiced with a crossbow for only 3 weeks, scored the first kill. His hands shook so violently afterward that his wife had to help him reload. But then something unexpected unfolded. The women, led by Ava Sessi, appeared on the walls carrying cauldrons of boiling water mixed with quicklime. As Ottoman troops crested the tops of their ladders, the women stepped forward without hesitation. The screams that followed echoed across both armies. Warriors who'd faced death in a dozen campaigns fled from housewives armed with kitchen implements. Bornemisza used these early assaults to test his innovations. His first experimental bomb, a clay pot filled with gunpowder and metal scraps, proved devastatingly effective when dropped on clustered enemies. But his real breakthrough came by pure accident. A wooden wheel, set ablaze and packed with explosives, broke free from its mounting and rolled down the hill into Ottoman ranks. The unpredictable path of the burning wheel caused more panic than any aimed weapon could have achieved. By day 8, a clear pattern had emerged. Days meant bombardment, a steady rhythm of destruction opening visible cracks in Eger's walls. By day 14, over 3,000 cannonballs had struck the castle. Defenders counted each one, ironically using the Ottomans' own ammunition to reinforce damaged sections. But nights brought a different war entirely. Ottoman miners, working by torchlight, began tunneling toward the walls. The defenders could hear them, picks striking stone in the darkness below. Dobo assigned his best listeners, including several musicians with trained ears, to track the underground approach. Countermining operations began immediately. Hungarian diggers, led by mining engineers from nearby mountains, excavated their own tunnels to intercept. What followed were the war's strangest battles, knife fights 30 feet underground, men killing each other in spaces so tight they could barely swing their arms. Bornemisza experimented with smoking out enemy tunnels, with flooding them, and finally with explosive charges that collapsed them entirely. The first 2 weeks established a brutal rhythm: bombardment and assault by day, underground warfare by night. Between desperate repairs, tending the wounded, and the constant work of survival, the civilians were transforming. Fear remained, but routine created its own form of courage. Women who'd fainted at the first cannon fire now worked calmly through bombardments. Children learned to sleep despite the thunder. On September 25th, the Ottomans launched their first major coordinated assault. 5,000 troops attacked simultaneously from 3 directions. For 6 hours, the walls swarmed with ladders, grappling hooks, and climbing men. Civilians fought alongside soldiers using anything that could kill: rocks, boiling oil, improvised spears. When one section nearly collapsed, Dobo himself led the countercharge, his ancestral sword cutting through Ottoman elite troops. The assault ultimately failed, but everyone understood it was merely a probe, a test of defenses before the real attack. Ottoman engineers had identified weak points. Their miners reported progress. Artillery had created promising cracks in the eastern wall. In the Ottoman camp, confidence remained sky-high. They'd lost perhaps 500 men, acceptable casualties for reconnaissance in force. The defenders looked exhausted. Their walls were crumbling. Their ammunition was running low. Ali Pasha told his officers with absolute certainty, "Another week of bombardment, then we take it." But on September 29th, everything would change. The real battle was about to begin. September 29th dawned with blood-red skies. The Ottoman War Council had reached their decision. Today, Eger would fall. Ahmed Pasha ordered 15,000 troops forward simultaneously. No more reconnaissance, no more testing. This was the killing blow. The assault commenced at first light with a bombardment that dwarfed everything previous. Every Ottoman cannon fired continuously. The eastern wall, already weakened, began to crumble. By noon, a breach opened, 15 feet wide, rubble-strewn but passable. The nightmare scenario had arrived. "The wall is down," the cry echoed through the castle. Defenders rushed to the gap, understanding this was where they would live or die. Dobo positioned his best troops at the opening, but there simply weren't enough. That's when Eva Sessi led her women's battalion forward, carrying their cauldrons of boiling oil mixed with sulfur. The first Ottoman wave hit the breach like a steel tidal surge. Janissaries, the elite of the elite, surged forward expecting to face demoralized soldiers. Instead, they met housewives who poured liquid fire from above. The oil clung to armor and skin alike. Men who'd never screamed in battle screamed now. Behind the women, children worked with desperate efficiency. 8-year-olds carried stones. 10-year-olds ran ammunition. A boy named Pater, just 12 years old, would later be remembered for maintaining arrow supply to 3 different positions while Ottoman fire fell around him like rain. But then came Bornemis's moment. He'd prepared for this, for breach defense specifically. As Janissaries packed into the gap, he gave the signal. His assistants lit the fuses on his newest creation, wooden wheels packed with gunpowder, metal fragments, and pitch. They rolled these burning wheels down wooden ramps directly into the breach. The first wheel exploded among packed Ottoman troops, the second followed, then a third. The wheels' random bouncing paths made them impossible to avoid. Flames spread through tightly packed ranks. The breach became a death trap. But the Ottomans were professionals, the best in the world. They pulled back, regrouped, and attacked again, and again, and again. For 6 hours, the breach saw continuous fighting. Bodies piled so high they formed a new barrier. Defenders used enemy corpses as shields. Below ground, a parallel battle raged in darkness. Ottoman miners had finally broken through, entering the castle's lower chambers. Hungarian counterminers met them in pitch-black tunnels. The underground war became a nightmare of close-quarters combat. Men fought with knives, picks, bare hands. The tunnels were too narrow for swords, too dark for accuracy. Bornemissa had prepared for this scenario too. He'd placed explosive charges at key points, ready to collapse tunnels if needed. When Ottoman troops began pouring through one underground breach, he gave the order without hesitation. The explosion shook the entire castle. The tunnel collapsed, trapping dozens on both sides, enemies and his own men alike. War made no distinctions. But collapsing that tunnel forced the underground fighters to the surface. Now the castle faced 2 simultaneous crisis points, the wall breach and enemies emerging from below. Dobo, already wounded in the leg from an arrow, commanded from the courtyard, sending reinforcements wherever the line wavered. October arrived with no respite. The Ottomans committed their reserves. Fresh Janissary units, men who'd conquered Belgrade, who'd taken Rhodes, climbed the walls in waves. Hand-to-hand combat raged along the battlements. Defenders pushed ladders away only to see 2 more take their place. A Janissary commander named Mustafa led a group that actually gained the wall. For 10 minutes, Ottoman banners flew above Eger. Then came one of the battle's strangest moments. The women of Eger, having exhausted their supply of oil, attacked with farm implements. Scythes meant for harvesting grain now harvested soldiers. Pitchforks found gaps in armor. Eva Sessi herself, burns covering her arms from oil splashes, led the charge that retook the wall. In his command tent, Ali Pasha watched through his telescope with growing disbelief. His elite troops, men who'd never failed, were being pushed back by civilians. Worse, he could see doubt spreading through his ranks like disease. Soldiers who should have pressed forward hesitated. The impossible was happening. October 5th brought the ammunition crisis. The Ottomans, despite their massive supply train, were running low on cannonballs. Weeks of bombardment had exhausted even their careful preparations. Inside Eger, the situation was worse. Gunpowder supplies were nearly gone. Arrows were being pulled from corpses to fire again. Defenders improvised desperately. When gunpowder ran out, they threw stones. When stones ran low, they threw anything: furniture, cooking pots, even shoes. One defender later wrote, "We threw our possessions at them. Then we threw parts of the castle itself." But then came the third reversal. Bornemissa, searching the castle's deepest cellars for anything useful, discovered a hidden cache, barrels of gunpowder forgotten from decades past. Not much, but enough for one more surprise. October 13th would determine everything. Ahmed Pasha, furious at the delay and the mounting casualties, ordered an all-out assault. 25,000 men would attack. No reserves, no rotation. Everyone forward until the castle fell. The assault began before dawn. Wave after wave struck the walls. Ladders rose like a forest, the breach filled with attackers. Every defender was on the walls now. Soldiers, civilians, women, children fighting side by side. A 14-year-old girl named Zofia would later be remembered for maintaining her crossbow position after both her parents fell beside her. The Ottomans gained the breach. They gained sections of the wall. Victory seemed moments away. Then Bornemissa unveiled his final creation. Using the last gunpowder, he built what he called fire wheels, larger than before, designed not just to explode but to spray burning pitch in all directions. The first fire wheel rolled into the Ottoman ranks at the breach, then another, and another. The packed troops had nowhere to flee. Fire spread through their ranks, panic followed. Men pushed backward, trampling their own comrades. At that crucial moment, Dobo, wounded, exhausted, raised his sword and shouted words that would echo through Hungarian history. "For your children, for Hungary, forward." Every defender followed. Soldiers, civilians, women, children, all surged forward in one desperate push. The Ottomans at the breach, already shaken by the fire wheels, broke. The panic spread like wildfire. Elite janissaries, men who'd never retreated, ran. From the Ottoman command post, Ali Pasha watched his army dissolve. Units that should have pressed forward pulled back. Officers couldn't restore order. The impossible had happened. 40,000 had been stopped by 2,000. As the sun set on October 13th, something impossible was unfolding. In the Ottoman command tent that night, the atmosphere was poisonous. Ahmed Pasha and Ali Pasha faced each other across the map table, their bitter rivalry finally exploding into open conflict. "Your cannons failed," Ahmed snarled. 16 siege guns and the walls still stand." "Your janissaries fled from women," Ali shot back. "The finest soldiers in the empire running from housewives." The truth was worse than either would admit. The casualty report lay between them. 10,000 Ottoman dead, a quarter of their force gone, including many elite troops. Disease had begun spreading through the camps. Dysentery from autumn rains, infected wounds festering in crowded conditions. But the psychological damage cut deeper. Word spread through the camps: Eger was cursed. The defenders weren't human, they were devils who threw fire and fought after death. Janissaries who'd never known fear whispered about burning wheels that chased men uphill, about women who fought harder than warriors, about children who laughed while killing. That night, Ottoman scouts reported something else. Hungarian relief forces were finally approaching. Not many, perhaps 3,000 men, but fresh troops against an exhausted, demoralized army. The war council lasted until dawn. Some commanders wanted to continue, but the mathematics had shifted. They'd lost too many men, too much ammunition, too much faith. At 2:00 a.m. on October 18th, the order went out: pack the camps. They would withdraw. In Eger Castle, exhausted defenders noticed the cannon fire had stopped. Dawn brought an impossible sight. The Ottoman camps were emptying, tents coming down, wagons loading, the great army preparing to leave. "Is it a trick?" defenders asked. Dobo sent scouts. They returned with incredible news. The Ottomans were truly retreating. The impossible had happened. David had not just faced Goliath, David had won. The victory speech Dobo gave was short. He could barely stand, wounds seeping through bandages. "We held," he said simply. "Hungary holds." But counting the cost sobered any celebration. Of 2,000 defenders, 700 were dead. Barely a family had escaped loss. The civilian casualties were horrific. Farmers who'd become soldiers, mothers who'd become warriors, children who'd become heroes, all paid in blood. The wounded overwhelmed what medical knowledge existed. Women who'd fought on the walls now fought to save lives. Eva Sessi, her own burns wrapped in cloth, organized the medical efforts. More civilians than soldiers filled the makeshift hospitals. Their injuries told the story. Burns from oil, cuts from close combat, crushed wounds from falling stones. The castle itself was a ruin. Walls showed gaps like missing teeth. The eastern tower had partially collapsed. 38 days of bombardment had left scars everywhere. Winter was coming and they had few supplies, fewer intact buildings. But Europe's reaction was electric. News spread like wildfire. A minor castle had stopped the Ottoman tide, not with professional armies or foreign allies, but with ordinary people fighting for their homes. In Vienna, church bells rang. In Rome, the Pope declared a day of celebration. The Holy Roman Emperor sent a letter that would be preserved in Hungarian archives. All Christendom owes a debt to Eger's defenders. They have shown that faith and courage weigh more than numbers. From the Ottoman side, the defeat sparked soul-searching. Official records minimized the loss, but private letters told the truth. One Janissary officer wrote, "We were not defeated by soldiers, but by a nation. Every person in that castle fought like their soul depended on it, because it did." The immediate strategic impact was clear. The Ottoman advance into Upper Hungary stopped. Vienna was safe for now. More importantly, the myth of Ottoman invincibility had cracked. If 2,000 civilians could stop 40,000 elite troops, what else was possible? But perhaps the most profound impact was on warfare itself. Military theorists across Europe studied Eger, trying to understand how civilians had achieved the impossible. The answer unsettled them. When people fight for their families, their homes, their very existence, traditional military calculations become meaningless. As winter closed in, Eger's survivors began rebuilding. They had won more than a battle. They had proven something eternal. Empires can conquer territories, but they cannot conquer the human spirit. Not when that spirit has something worth fighting for. The Siege of Eger sent shockwaves across Europe that reshaped military thinking for generations. The Ottoman Empire, which had seemed unstoppable, had been halted by farmers and housewives. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Strategically, Eger bought Hungary precious time. The Ottoman expansion westward stalled, giving the Habsburg Empire years to strengthen defenses. Vienna, which might have fallen in 1553, instead stood firm when the Ottomans finally arrived in 1683. Those extra decades made all the difference. The defeat forced Ottoman military reform. They realized their traditional siege tactics, overwhelming firepower and elite infantry, could fail against determined civilian defenders. Future Ottoman campaigns would emphasize rapid movement and avoiding prolonged sieges where possible. The empire that had perfected siege warfare began to fear it. But Eger's greatest impact was cultural. It proved that ordinary people could alter history's course. Across Europe, the siege became required study in military academies, not for its tactics, but for its lesson about human will. The idea that civilians could be effective defenders revolutionized fortress design. New fortifications included positions specifically for civilian auxiliaries. The role of women at Eger shattered conventions. Eva Sessi and her battalion proved that warfare wasn't an exclusively male domain. While formal recognition would take centuries, Eger planted seeds that would eventually bloom into accepted female military participation. For Hungary, Eger became a national touchstone. Through centuries of foreign domination, Ottoman, then Austrian, then Soviet, the siege reminded Hungarians what they could accomplish united. The castle became a pilgrimage site, its broken walls more powerful than any intact fortress. The siege's lessons resonate today. Modern military theorists studying asymmetric warfare often cite Eger. When conventional force meets unconventional determination, calculations change. Afghanistan, Vietnam. Countless conflicts show Eger's truth. Motivated defenders fighting for home possess advantages that pure military power cannot overcome. The psychological principle remains unchanged. The Ottomans came to conquer a castle. They found something far more dangerous, a community that chose death over surrender, not from fanaticism but from love for their families, their neighbors, their way of life. Bornemis's innovations, improvised weapons using available materials, prefigured modern guerrilla warfare. His firewheels were primitive, but the concept of turning enemy advantages into weaknesses would echo through military history. Perhaps most powerfully, Eger demonstrated that heroism isn't reserved for professionals. Joseph the farmer, Ava the merchant's wife, young Peter carrying ammunition. They proved that ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances can achieve the impossible. Returning to our opening paradox, 2,000 ordinary Hungarians stopped 40,000 elite Ottoman warriors. Now you understand how. Not through superior weapons or brilliant tactics, but through something more fundamental. The Ottoman Empire assumed people would choose survival over freedom. They calculated that civilians would break under professional military pressure. They were wrong. At Eger, the defenders chose neither survival nor freedom alone. They chose each other. And in that choice, they found both victory and immortality. Empires rise and fall, castles crumble to dust. But the lesson of Eger endures. When ordinary people stand together for what they love, they become extraordinary. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough to change the world.